invite you to take your Bibles, if you would, and turn to Acts chapter 23. Acts chapter 23. We continue our verse-by-verse study through this book and continue a longer stretch of narrative that we've been in for the last several weeks. And we're just continuing forward here with Paul really facing these that would oppose the message of the gospel, in particular these Judaizers that continue to confront his teaching and continue to make accusations against him that are causing quite a bit of trouble. We have had so far, even just in the last couple of weeks, Paul, who was in Jerusalem at a scene of a great mob on the Temple Mount as they thought he was bringing in Gentiles into the inner courts of the Temple Mount area, which was punishable by death. And these Judaizers were upset about it. They take Paul. They're going around him. There's people joining in this mob, probably unsure what they're really there to do. The Romans see this, who are in the Tower of Antonia there, observing the Temple Mount, knowing that it's a hotbed for trouble. And they end up being able to grab Paul, kind of figure out what's going on. They're going to bring Paul in to flog him, and then they find out Paul's a Roman citizen. They say, well, that's not a good idea. We can't do that. So they bring him before the Sanhedrin to ultimately present a case. What can we discern about what's going on here? Why exactly is this man in so much trouble with these Judaizers? And they get to the bottom of it, really realizing that, well, they don't really know what the case is. The Judaizers are mad. They continue to make these proclamations that Paul is desecrating their temple and their customs. He is preaching a false religion. We'll see that even more today. And the Romans, still unsure of what to do, are going to act in a different way as they hold Paul, again, saving him from the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, who are going to rip him to shreds because they are so mad, and they're mad amongst themselves. Paul in his defense that we saw last week. And now Paul finds himself again back in the Tower of Antonia under captivity from the Romans as they await really what to do with this whole situation. What we're going to see here in chapter 23 and verse 12 into chapter 24 and verse 9, and we'll even stretch on before that next week, but what we're going to see really is kind of the beginnings of a courtroom drama that takes place in Scripture. And there is nothing more than a courtroom drama that I enjoy very much. Some popular ones, the title of this message, 40 Angry Men, stemming from, anyone know it? Okay, very good. You're all very old. 12 Angry Men, good. Classic movie, actually listed as the best courtroom drama of all time. So if you've never seen it, give it a chance. It's a very good movie, 12 Angry Men. But it reminds me of some other famous courtroom cases that maybe you're familiar with. Here's this one. Who's that guy? Yeah, O.J. Simpson, right? Your favorite running back. Anyway, if the glove doesn't fit, you must. Good, very good. And, the glove didn't fit, but it kind of did. So anyway, but that's, neither here nor there. Famous trials, another one popular now in modern day because of TV series, but the Menendez brothers killed their parents, and some controversy there about whether that was justified. But there is no greater courtroom drama. Not 12 Angry Men, not O.J. Simpson, not the Menendez brothers. There is no greater courtroom drama than the one and only Judge Judy. I mean, things do not get much better than that. There was nothing like growing up, and I don't know, like 5:30 or whatever, right before Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy, whatever came on, seeing Judge Judy just rip into some people that really had no idea what they were talking about. So I hope that we can meet the standard that the Judge Judy has laid for us today. I think we will. I think this is a better story. But we will have some courtroom drama before us eventually here as we work through this text. And within that, we will be able to discern and glean a lot of principles of how Paul deals with these things and how we too might view some of these things together. So let's jump into the text here, starting in verse 12 of Acts 23. When it was day, so this is the next day after this whole big Sanhedrin council scene and Paul taken back into the Tower of Antonia. When it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he has brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near." We have a great conspiracy that is laid before us here. Clearly, this sect of Jewish people, and some that made up the Sanhedrin, these Pharisees and these Sadducees, and many who are part of this mob, at least 40, there's over 40 of them, are banding together to find a way to draw Paul out and to kill him. They really find no other solution. Clearly, what he has been teaching, they take offense to, and it seems that the courts can't settle it. The Romans seem unwilling to do anything about it. The Sanhedrin is divided in and amongst themselves. So what is there to do other than to form this plot against him and to kill him? We see, though, in this response, really how serious this plot is. There's some great depth and really great seriousness of what it is that they're seeking to do. And it really reflects on the character of these that would oppose the truth and oppose Paul. It says, when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath. The seriousness we see here, first of all, stems from this oath. It says that saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. That's a serious oath. This was really sort of a legal thing for them, that they would bind themselves under a curse. We will not eat or drink. We will not do those things which are necessary to our lives until this man is dead. They are willing to go even to those lengths. It says we will not eat or sleep or drink, sort of understanding, until this man is dealt with. And so they've concocted this plan. But you see the seriousness as they take an oath. They're not just set on killing Paul. They are ready to do it now, and they will do anything to kill him. We see also the seriousness in the number of them. It says in verse 13, now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. It is not just a few people. It's not just one or two that say, hey, this is a good idea. Hey, let's go rogue. Let's take care of this ourselves. This is a coalition. This is a group, a mob of people that say, hey, let's take care of business. Let's take this guy out. And they all take this serious oath to try to kill Paul. But we also see how serious they are because of who they involve, and especially the power of those that they involve. Note what it says in verse 14. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, we've bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he has brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near. They don't just do this behind the scenes. Again, it's not just a couple of people that say, hey, without anybody knowing, let's go down there and let's find a way and let's sneak in or something, let's kill Paul. They include the highest powers. These same people that they just sat before with this Sanhedrin council, these same Pharisees and these elders and these scribes, they go before them and they say, look, we have a plan and we want you to be a part of this. And apparently they are. We see no dissent here anyway from these higher-ups, from these powerful people. They are set ultimately to follow through and to kill Paul. But we also see how serious this is because of their zeal. Again, we have the oath that is mentioned in verse 15, but this whole plan, they say, why don't you as the council make a recommendation to the commander, the Roman commander, and say, hey, look, we are looking to bring Paul in for some more questioning, and when they bring him out for questioning, we will sneak in and we will kill him, the 40 of them. They'll make a scene. Now, here's the issue with that particular plan. If these 40 are going to go in and they're going to practice this and they are going to do this, they are certainly setting themselves up for death. They are setting themselves up ultimately to be put to death by these Romans because they're going to try to overpower them. This wouldn't be a secretive plot. This would be a large known plot, 40 people sort of storming that tower to kill Paul. They were willing not only to not eat and not to drink, they were willing themselves to die for this. That's how serious they were about this. That's how opposed to the truth of the gospel they are. Whatever it takes, they're willing to do. We see this similar zeal, I think, even today. And we have talked about this plenty of times throughout our study of this text and through the book of Acts. Deep opposition to the gospel. Deep opposition to the truth. The gospel is offensive, and the gospel will divide. It does here for Paul, and we see the seriousness of this conspiracy and this plot. But we have God's grace demonstrated as well as this conspiracy is thwarted. Look at what it says in verse 16. When Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander. He has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul, the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you." The commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you." We see the plot ultimately is spoiled, and we have sort of three different characters that are going to be involved in this section of the text, and even further here as we get closer to chapter 24. Those that are part of this spoiling of the plot. And primarily we have Paul's nephew. Now this is the first mention in Scripture of any family of Paul. This is the first mention of certainly of a sister or of a nephew by any means. And we really don't know anything else about him other than he appears to be a young man, but that's about it. We don't know his spiritual status. We don't know his relationship to Paul. We don't know, assuming that they lived in Jerusalem, it would seem that that would be the case given his proximity to this. We just don't have all the details and the facts other than we know that he's here and that God has certainly used him and places him to be one to thwart and to reveal the plot that ultimately is set against Paul. And we see how he does that. He goes into the tower. He is able to visit with Paul. He tells Paul that he's overheard some of these grumblings that have taken place. This plot, this conspiracy clearly wasn't done super secretively, or maybe this nephew had some inside information somehow through his own connections, and this plot is revealed. So he goes and he tells Paul of this plot, and Paul says, "Go and talk to this commander," and this commander ultimately would be able to reveal this plot to Lysias and would be able to make a decision from there. And so Paul's nephew is used in a mighty way here to persuade and to thwart off of this great plot and this serious matter that these Judaizers have set out to do. But then we also see Lysias, who is involved in a sense in thwarting this particular plan. We read here what it says further on in verse 22. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, "Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me." And he called for 2 centurions, saying, "Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on. Bring him safely to Felix the governor." And he wrote a letter in the following manner. We'll look at that here in a moment. So this commander, upon hearing the plot that was set against Paul, decides that the best thing they can do is to get Paul out of there. Knowing that Paul would be in danger the longer he stays in Jerusalem, knowing that this mob is dead set against him, he recognized that the best thing to do would be to get Paul out of the equation. Now, there is mostly selfish motivations and reasons for this, and some of that we'll see here in the letter. It's not so much the value of Paul's life outside that he is a Roman citizen, as much as it is as it's part of Lysias' job to keep the peace in Jerusalem. And for this ongoing present anger and mob and these conspiracies, it would certainly be a detriment to his authority in this particular place. And so here he sees that what is best fit is to remove the problem from the situation, and maybe that'll cause things to settle down. But we recognize here what he writes in this letter to Felix. He says in verse 26, Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. When it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. Now, there's a few things here. Note really what he leaves out of this letter. He says in verse 27 that this man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. And coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. Now, how was it that Lysias learned that Paul was a Roman? Well, it was only after they had put him into, cuffs, for lack of a better term, right? They tied him up, and they were about to flog him that Paul says, oh, by the way, I'm a Roman. You can't do this. But Lysias would not want to mention that. That would not make him look good in the eyes of this governor. So a small detail that he leaves out. He also says, I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. And when it was told to me that the Jews lie in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you. Also giving the sense that he was somehow responsible for saving Paul and discovering this plot when it was told to me, as if he had done some inquiry, as if it was his men that had discovered this thing and not this young man, this nephew of Paul, that ultimately brought this information to him. He's trying to paint a good picture and a good light before this governor, this procurator. He's wanting to have a good view of his authority in this area, and so he leaves out some key details. But he sums up nicely what we've read so far in the last couple of chapters. But note really what it is that he concludes in verse 29. He says, I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. This is what Lysias has concluded on this whole matter. Even apart from what's gone on with the Sanhedrin, even with what has happened with the mob scene at the Temple Mount, the accusations made, trying to understand Paul in his defense that he gave in Hebrew to those Jewish people there on the Mount, Lysias has determined that there's nothing deserving of death or chains, that Paul should be a free man, that he cannot figure out and discern that even with these questions of the law and these accusations made, that Paul is deserving of any of these things. Now, this is an interesting conclusion and an important conclusion, because we have seen this same determination made so far multiple times throughout the book of Acts. Acts chapter 18, verse 14 through 15. Gallio made the same determination that Paul was not guilty, that there was nothing wrong, that this gospel message, that what it was taught, was not deserving of the accusations made against them. We see the city executive in Ephesus in chapter 19, verse 40, come to another similar conclusion, that there is no fault found in these men. The Pharisees, just last week, chapter 23 and verse 9, even they, in defending Paul's reasoning for the resurrection, even they make a proclamation that Paul really is fine to say what he says, because he boasts of the resurrection, which they too agree with, which the Sadducees don't. There's two more occurrences in chapter 25, verse 25, and chapter 26, where we will see Paul brought before trial and the conclusion made, he has not done anything wrong. It's important and interesting to note, because as we talk about a world in which this message is so offensive, We must stand firm in recognizing and realizing that even though people will take offense to the truth of the gospel, there is nothing wrong in declaring the gospel. There is nothing wrong in declaring that truth. Even though others may reject it, even though others may hate it, it is what is the most needed. And so we, as Paul, stand firm as we proclaim it. We have a final character, though, who's going to come onto the scene and who is part of this idea of thwarting this conspiracy, and that is Felix the governor. In verse 31, it says, "The soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris." Now, this is 470 soldiers, I believe it is, at least, at a minimum, that are taking him. This is no small entourage that is concerned with taking Paul out of this region. So they begin to head north, and they do so in the cover of night. And this distance and travel from Jerusalem to Antipatris was hilly and mountainous, was difficult to travel. And they knew that if they could get at least that far, about 25 or 30 miles or so, that it would be nearly impossible for anyone to come behind and try to overthrow them and kill Paul, as this plot had determined to do. Verse 32, it says, "The next day they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks." So now a smaller entourage continues with him, and they ultimately are going to go to a place called Caesarea. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I will hear you when your accusers have also come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. So here you have a couple days' journey north from Jerusalem where they are going to be, and you have this area of Caesarea, this port city, a very prominent area. The ruins there today still boast of a great city. And Felix, the governor who is there, is able to take this particular case that is presented to him from Lysias, who traveled with Paul and the rest of his entourage to Caesarea. Lysias would have been commanded to travel since he was the bearer of this letter presenting really his inmate, his prisoner, to the governor. And so he takes them to Felix, and Felix asks where Paul is from, what province he is from. Roman law would determine that if a case was presented, it would either have to be taken place in the area that the accusations were made, which would be in Jerusalem. Well, they tried that. That didn't go very well. Or it would have to take part in a place where this particular governor or this particular legate had some power or authority over a province. And Felix, as a deputy of a legate of Cilicia, has authority even in Caesarea to hear this particular case. It's not a case that he would want to take to the higher-ups. It's not a case that he would want to travel all the way to Tarsus in order to try Paul there. And so instead, they have it here in Caesarea, which is in their Roman right to do so. And so Felix, this governor, is going to be presented with this case, but he says in verse 35, "I will hear you when your accusers also have come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium, so barracks. So Paul, again, imprisoned as they await this the Sanhedrin, scribes and elders, and we'll see the high priests who are going to come. Those who make the accusations against him are going to travel to Caesarea, and we will have a much more formal trial for Paul. A much more formal case will be brought against him, and Felix will be able to hear this particular case. We're going to learn a little bit more about Felix here in a moment, but needless to say this, Felix is not a good guy, and he is not really a rightful governor or a rightful judge, and he is a sort of a power-hungry person, and you can sense that in the way that Lysias talks about him or talks to him, even in his letter, and you will certainly sense that in what we see next, beginning here in chapter 24. So now we enter into the courtroom drama. We have all of the background information. We have all of the reason of why Paul is moved from Jerusalem ultimately to Caesarea. We have the invitation for the high priests and these scribes and other Judaizers to come, those who made the accusation against Paul. And now we are about to hear in verse 1, enter into the courtroom of Felix and see what takes place. Verse 1 of chapter 24. After 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul. So, with any good courtroom case, the plaintiff will be able to present their case, and that's what we have here. Again, to show us some of the seriousness of this particular anger and hatred for Paul and the message he brings, we recognize and see here that they have hired a professional. They have hired a professional lawyer, for really a better term here, this orator named Tertullus. And he is going to present the case, sort of, against Paul and be the voice of all these accusations that are made against him. Well, let's look carefully here about how he builds his case. And maybe if there's any wannabe lawyers in the room, you can take some of these practices for yourself, perhaps. Verse 2. When he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, "Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to this nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness." What a way to start out. What is it that he is doing? Well, he is flattering Felix. Whatever he can to butter him up, to make him sound good. And this is the thing. Nobody thought this about Felix. Everybody hated him. He was one that had so many different wives, had married into power, really shouldn't even be in this particular position of power that he is in. And again, in the historians like Josephus and others who write about some of these, not written in a very good light at all, but one that certainly loves to be praised. And I think Lysias knew it, and certainly Tertullus here knew it, and he just flatters him up. This talking about this great peace, this prosperity as being brought to this nation by your foresight and accepting it all, most noble Felix. Well, it wouldn't be too long before Felix is sent back to Rome because he did such a bad job governing Caesarea. But here he's at least being flattered. And then he begins to build the case against Paul. Verse 4, "Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us, for we have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple. We seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. But the commander Lysias came by and with great violence took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. By examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him." And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. There's three particular points he makes about Paul. One, he calls Paul a pest. He says here ultimately that nevertheless not to be tedious to you any further, we have found this man a plague, a pest, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world. Meaning not only what Paul had done in Jerusalem, but Paul in his missionary journeys, they are saying, look, he's just causing trouble wherever he goes. Whether he's in the synagogues, whether he's in Jerusalem, whether he's in these other areas, it seems that trouble always follows after Paul. But what he doesn't mention is who is it that typically is bringing the trouble? Those who are accusing him of being the troublemaker. He has things backwards here, but he has to represent, his particular side of things, and he does a good job in that. But he calls Paul a pest. He's a troublemaker. And if Paul is a troublemaker in Jerusalem, which is under Roman control, then you could consider Paul a troublemaker against Rome. This is the beginning of the case he's trying to build. Not only that, but he also accuses Paul of leading a new religion. Look at the second part of verse 5. It says, "And a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes." Now this is interesting. It's the first time that this is used in the form of a particular religion. And it's really meant to give the status of what Paul is doing, almost a cult-like status. That Jesus, who was a Nazarene, that they link him back to Christ, they link him to Jesus, but using this title of the sect of the Nazarenes, that it's something totally separate or something totally outside any other formalized religion. Now, Rome had very particular rules and had very particular rules set against organized religion other than what they had allowed. And what they had allowed for the Jews and for Judaism and the belief and the practice with the temple and everything else, they had set alone. And many would say that, well, Christianity formed out of that, because think of all the shared, the Old Testament and the prophets and all of the promises and all these different things. There are many similarities. But here the case that Tertullus is trying to bring against Paul is that this has nothing to do with what the Jews are teaching. This is something totally separate. This is not allowed. This has not been sanctioned by Rome. And so here you have this sort of rogue man leading a whole new cult of people who ultimately are going to be enemies and in opposition to Rome. Again, nothing really could be further from the truth. That this is stemming from the same heritage, the same lineage that Paul himself has already attested to. That he is a Jew, that he was a son of a Pharisee, that he understands the law and the prophets. He was in Jerusalem to celebrate particular feasts. Yet they're viewing this as something totally outside and set apart. But the teachings of Paul would certainly lend itself to that, as it does profess and proclaim that you no longer need to become like a Jew. You no longer need to be circumcised. You no longer need to practice and follow the same law, Mosaic law. You are one now in Christ. And his third accusation is that Paul has desecrated the temple. We continue reading here, and it says in verse 6, he even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. Certainly this ties back to Paul being accused of bringing in Gentiles into the inner courts of the temple area, which again was not true. But even beyond that Paul himself had ill plans, that he had some conspiracy of his own to thwart the Jewish people, to desecrate the temple somehow. Interesting that it wasn't Paul who ultimately would desecrate the temple, but it would be the Romans that would be responsible for doing so. The very people that here Tertullus is appealing to. So the case is made. We have a troublemaker. We have one who is starting his own religion, it seems, and is following this new unsanctioned religion, and one who is going to tear apart all of our customs that you have given us permission to follow. He's laid hands on him, and there's been an uprising, as he attests to, but he's been taken by violence out of our hands, he says. So now we bring him to you to examine him of all these things which we accuse him. In verse 9 it says the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. The voice of those around these accusers come before and say, yes, all of what Tertullus has said here is ultimately true. We will next week look at Paul's defense and how greatly it differs from that of Tertullus here. But there is some ironic truth in the plaintiff's case that I think echoes very much for us today. And the first one is this: unrighteousness appeals to unrighteousness. Tertullus presents this case to Felix, and Felix, again, certainly not a good guy. And Tertullus, representing this group of Judaizers who seek to thwart the gospel and to kill Paul, also representing a particular form of unrighteousness. Yet we note the way in which they interact in the midst of one another, especially in Tertullus and his flattery of Felix here, saying that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to you to this nation. Your foresight we accept it always in all places. Most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Whatever means possible for this one particular group to get what they want, even if it means the flattery of another group that is equally as unrighteous, and even as at times has tension, and even in the midst of this time has tension with the Jews and has oppressed them at times, they will appeal to unrighteousness if it means they can ultimately get what their own heart desires. Unrighteousness appeals to unrighteousness. It is the same today. Groups of those who are so far from God, who are so apart from God, seem to attract and to assemble with others who are so far apart from God and are so unrighteous and love to practice their unrighteousness together, and seemingly are only opposed to those who love the truth and who love righteousness and who are pursuing righteousness. But we shouldn't be surprised that this is the case. We shouldn't be surprised that unrighteous people attract other unrighteous people. We shouldn't be surprised that unrighteousness attracts unrighteousness. I've told this story plenty of times before, but I think it helps to illustrate this point. You know, we started basketball ministry down here 10 years ago, pretty much right when we moved in this building. You know, open gym, Thursday night basketball, and it was mainly guys from the community that were coming in. These aren't church people. They have no concept really of God. They have little understanding in conversations I've had with them. And, you know, the way that they view things is much different than the way that we would view things. And so in the midst of, you know, playing basketball, you know, you go down there on a Thursday night, it's not always the most pleasant place to be. There's a particular smell that comes, that emanates from the gym. You can go Friday and have a great time here at church if you want Friday mornings. There's often arguments. There's been several fights that have taken place. Every, you know, curse word under the sun has been uttered down in the gymnasium. And you know what? You expect that to be the case. Why would you expect anything else? Why would you expect unrighteous people who are far from God to act righteously or to be attracted to righteousness? You don't. And I've said it many times, but they are much more well-behaved here, I promise you, than they are anywhere else. And they have even made comments over the years about, you know, we got to be careful what we say because we're in a church. I'm like, well, you're in a gym, but I get the point. But just the sense that they're in this church building makes them holy, and so they have to be careful about what they say, right? So they're trying, right? They do try to behave themselves. But ultimately, unrighteousness appeals to unrighteousness. We have that here in the story. These people banding together to oppose truth, to oppose the gospel. I think the greater issue and how this really applies to us and how we might understand it is the danger when righteousness appeals to unrighteousness. You know, for us that are trying to pursue God and us, by God's grace, who are seeking to live obediently to Him, we can recognize all that is around us and the unrighteousness that we are surrounded with, and we proclaim and we profess and we condemn and we do all of those things. But how about when we practice unrighteousness? We who have been set so free from that. We who have been able to put on a new man. We who have been baptized with Christ. We who have a new identity with Christ. How concerned are we when righteousness appeals to unrighteousness? When we live according to the old man? When we live in the desires of the flesh? What we have in this story, we expect. But what we should never tolerate and never expect is those who profess and who claim to be close to God and pursuing God, but often appeal to an unrighteous nature. Not only that, but we also see from this that worldliness seeks peace through worldly means. We're really going to hit on this next week as we note the staunch difference between Paul's defense and the plaintiff here presented in Tertullus and what he proclaims. But again, note what he says. He says, seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to you, or brought to this nation by your foresight, right? He's flattering, he's appealing to the man-made condition of peace, and that's something that even here didn't really exist. But this idea that, you know, we can have peace through these means. If you just give us what we want, everything will finally be right. This is why so many self-help books are published every single year. Because the world wants things right, but they want it through every mean that doesn't involve the only way to set things right. And so people will try continually again and again and again and again, how can I have success? How can I have peace? How can I finally be at rest? How can I finally not be anxious? How can I not have depression? How can I cure these things? And so people have pills, and people have books, and people have counselors, and people have everything under the sun other than the one thing that they truly, desperately need. And the world seeks after peace, and here the Judaizers, they want their own sense of peace. They want what is in opposition and a detriment to them, it seems, to finally be done away with. And the only way that they think that can be accomplished is through this particular higher authority, this political authority through the Romans themselves. And so they appeal in this way. We recognize that, again, happening in the world, and those far from Christ not recognizing the joy and the peace that is brought only by Christ. But again, just as righteousness sometimes appeals to unrighteousness, what about when the godly seek peace through worldly means? We put a lot of emphasis and we put a lot of pressure on coming to peace now and what can we do, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with some of those things, and exercising your right to vote and all of these different things too, but at the end of the day, essentially all that we hope for here is still something which is a man-made and a man-centric issue. Is peace ever going to be brought about by some political party? No, it's not. Ultimate true peace, as we talked about with that word shalom several weeks ago, is only going to be brought about by one person, Jesus Christ. And so we oftentimes can set our own minds and our own hearts on a peace that we think we can achieve ourselves or through some other means here in this world, but we can lose sight often that that's only truly going to be accomplished by the Prince of Peace. Even within evangelicalism, this has become an issue. Devotional books and Bible studies become more like self-help books than they do actually studying the principles of Scripture. This is why preachers, that's a loose word, so-called preachers, like the ones in Texas with big churches and jets who names rhyme with Joel Osteen, that's why they're so popular. Because what they're professing is some form of self-help and worldly peace. It's not the gospel, and it's certainly not the truth. And that leads us to this last ironic truth. We see here the enemies of the gospel reject the very thing that they need. What it is that these Judaizers want is a kingdom. They want all of the promises given to them in the Old Testament through the prophets to come to fruition. They don't want Rome over them. They don't want there to be all of this opposition. They don't want this other message from this other man, this Paul, to come in and to speak ill against their law and everything else. They just want ultimately what is promised in the pages of that Old Testament scripture, at least in part. But the very means in which they are able to achieve that is the very thing that they reject. The message that Paul has come to preach, the message that he is teaching of a gospel, the message that it is no longer law, it is no longer circumcision, it is neither slave or free, it is neither Jew nor Greek. We are one in Christ Jesus. That message that he has taught, that gospel that he has preached, is the very thing that they need, and they reject it. I think that this is ultimately the case that can be made for the world at large today. I think many and most people want peace in some way. Whether they think that peace is only going to be achieved through violence and war, I think at the end of the day, nations and people still ultimately desire some sense of peace. But how that's achieved and how that is understood leads to various divisions and means of getting there. But again, the only true way that that is achieved comes through the person of Christ. And in our particular culture, especially in our American culture, where the post-Christian culture is being put at the forefront, and it's much more man-centric, and it's about your feelings and how you identify in all of these different things, what they ultimately desire, whether it's those who are in the LGBTQ plus community, whether it's those who make up a more progressive understanding, whether it's those that want to hold hands with everybody and kumbaya and love everybody, or whatever it is, what everyone ultimately desires and what everyone wants to obtain, what everyone wants in acceptance and in love and in really ultimately peace is never going to be achieved by those particular means in which they seek to get them. And it seems that unrighteousness will pool together to try to find a way to work together to achieve those means, and it does so at the expense of the only thing that's actually going to bring them what they want. They vehemently oppose the gospel. They deny the truth. They deny the efficiency and the necessity of the message that we proclaim. But it is that same very message, and it is only that message of Christ crucified, of faith in Christ, of the grace of a holy God demonstrated to us through the sending of his Son, dying on the cross, taking sins, rising again, and coming back. It is only that message that will save anyone and will ultimately bring about the very peace we so desperately desire. They reject the very thing that they need. We see it here in Paul's day, and we certainly see it in ours. So we too are surrounded by at least 40 angry men, probably many, many more. But as we will see, especially next week, I pray that our response as we stand firm in the call to proclaim the message of truth and stand firm in the gospel will be one that looks more like Paul and less like Tertullus, that does not uphold righteousness appealing to unrighteousness, that does not uphold man-centric ideas of worldly peace, and that does not reject the very thing we need. We can look a lot of other places for help. We can look a lot of other places for satisfaction. We can look a lot of other places for purpose in life and whatever else it may be that your heart desires. But there is only and has only ever been and will only ever be one person who can bring about those things. Jesus Christ. That's it. And that's the very person in which we are able to commemorate and to celebrate and to remember as we come to the Lord's table. It's not just about the death. It's not just about the canceling of sins, but it's also about the propelling us to a greater hope, to a better eternity, to a better Eden, to something so far beyond that which we have here and now. That which we long for, that which we hope for, is only accomplished because of what Christ has done for us. So I invite you to stand, if you would. We're going to sing verses 1 through 3.